June 6, 1944. 5 a.m. Krisk Battery, Normandy coast. Oberleutnant Zuri Walter Olmsson scanned the horizon through trembling binoculars, capturing a sight that defied every assurance from the German High Command. The English Channel, once viewed as an impenetrable barrier, had become a sea of steel. Through the mist stretched an armada of 6,939 vessels, 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 auxiliary ships, and 864 merchant vessels, crewed by more than 195,000 sailors from 8 Allied nations. At 5:52 a.m., Olmsson's battery received the order to fire. 3 minutes later, the first 210mm Skoda shells arced toward the fleet drops against a tsunami. His guns engaged the cruisers USS Tuscaloosa, USS Quincy, and battleship USS Nevada. By 6:30 a.m., Krisk Battery had sunk the destroyer USS Corey, the only American destroyer lost on D-Day. From his reinforced concrete post, the 32-year-old naval officer became the first German defender to sight and engage the Allied invasion of Fortress Europe. What Olmsson saw was not just an invasion, it was the industrial embodiment of Allied power. The mathematics of defeat advanced toward him at 8 knots. Across Normandy, other German officers witnessed the same display that marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's thousand-year Reich. The night before, at Army Group B headquarters in La Roche-Guyon, Lieutenant General Hans Spittel, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, received alarming reports. Rommel, in Germany for his wife's birthday, believed poor weather made invasion impossible. At 1:20 a.m., the 7th Army reported mass parachute drops. More than 13,000 men of the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions descended from Douglas C-47's. General Erich Marx, commanding 84 Corps from St. Eltar, a veteran who had lost a leg at Stalingrad, immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. Yet even he could not imagine the scale of what approached. The Wehrmacht had prepared for an invasion, but not for an industrial avalanche. Vice Admiral Friedrich Ruge, Rommel's naval advisor, had spent months inspecting defenses. "We were preparing to fight the last war," he later admitted. They were bringing the next one. The German High Command expected perhaps 20 Allied divisions supported by 3,000 vessels. But at dawn, observers from Cherbourg to Le Havre reported thousands of ships. This was not a raid, it was the largest amphibious invasion in history. At strongpoint WN-62 above Omaha Beach, Jeff writer Hinrich Sepp, a 20-year-old farm boy from Metzingen who had never seen the sea, peered through his embrasure at 5:45 a.m. "I saw no ocean," he recalled, "only steel. Big ships, small ships, destroyers like sheepdogs. I stopped counting at 100. There were thousands." At 5:30 a.m., the naval bombardment began. 5 battleships, 20 cruisers, 65 destroyers, and 2 monitors. The USS Texas alone fired 255 rounds from her 14-inch guns in the first hour, 178 tons of explosives. Before the first soldier landed, Allied warships had unleashed roughly 130,000 tons of shells. "We had prepared to fight soldiers," recalled General Gunther Blüthner. "We found ourselves fighting factories." At 6 a.m., the sky filled with aircraft, 14,674 Allied sorties. The Luftwaffe, with barely 300 operational planes in France, managed only 319 sorties. For every German aircraft, there were 46 Allied. Major Joseph Priller and his wingman Heinz Wodacek made the only Luftwaffe attack that morning, strafing Sword Beach once before fleeing. German air power had ceased to exist. Despite the bombardment, some defenders held. At Omaha, the 352nd Infantry Division occupied commanding bluffs, its machine guns cutting down the first waves of Americans from the 1st and 29th Divisions. Sepp's MG-42 spat 12,000 rounds that morning. Men fell by the dozens. The beach ran red. For a moment, it seemed the Atlantic Wall might hold. Then came the destroyers. At 8 a.m., as General Omar Bradley considered evacuation, U.S. destroyers closed to within 1,000 yards of the beach. USS McCook, Carmick, Goyle, and Frankfurt fired their 5-inch guns at point-blank range, erasing strongpoints one by one. It was a reckless, decisive act that broke the stalemate. The Germans realized the truth. Ships and men were expendable to a nation that could endlessly replace them. By afternoon, The sea became an assembly line of war. LCs, LSTs, and LCTs landed men, tanks, and trucks in unbroken waves. Amphibious WWII swam ashore with supplies. By nightfall, 156,000 Allied troops had landed, 132,715 by sea, 23,400 by air, bringing 20,000 vehicles, 1,700 tanks, and 15,000 tons of materiel. The German 7th Army defending Normandy had fewer than 500 operational tanks. When the 21st Panzer Division counterattacked at 4:00 p.m., Allied aircraft and naval guns annihilated it. Hum's Warspite's 15-inch shells struck 15 miles inland. SS Standartenführer Kurt Meyer wrote, "Our strength was swept away like a wave breaking on rock." On June 7th, German commanders were stunned. The Allies were building ports, not seizing them. The prefabricated Mulberry Harbour's 600,000 tons of concrete and 93 scuttled ships could handle 9,000 tons of supplies daily, nullifying years of Atlantic Wall fortifications. Operation Fortitude's deception. The Phantom 1st U.S. Army Group, under General Patton, had convinced Hitler that Normandy was a diversion. Reinforcements remained near Calais for weeks. Only when captured documents revealed Patton commanding the real Third Army did General Leo von Schweppenberg grasp the truth. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, asked why the invasion hadn't been repelled, replied, "Make peace, you fools. What else can you do?" He was dismissed. On June 17th, Rommel met Hitler at Margeval, presenting facts: Allied air supremacy, depleted divisions, paralysis under naval fire. Hitler demanded resistance. Rommel left, knowing Germany was doomed. Within a month, implicated in the July 20th plot, he was forced to take his own life. Blumentritt later wrote, "We were not defeated by better soldiers or superior strategy. We were buried under an avalanche of material." On July 7th, 467 RAF bombers dropped 2,500 tons on Cannes, in 40 minutes more than the entire French Luftwaffe arsenal. The 12th SS Panzer Hitlerjugend entered Normandy 20,540 strong, with 150 tanks. 6 weeks later, 300 men remained no tanks. Operation Cobra, launched July 25th, confirmed the inevitable. 1,500 heavy bombers, 380 mediums, and 550 fighter bombers dropped 3,300 tons of explosives across 6,000 yards. General Fritz Bayerlein's Panzer-Lehr division was obliterated. "We are not fighting an army," he radioed. "We are fighting an industrial complex. Of 3,000 men, 1/3 were killed, 1/3 wounded, 1/3 broken." By August, the Falaise pocket became the graveyard of German forces. Between 10,000 and 15,000 Germans were killed, 40,000 to 50,000 captured, 344 tanks and 2,447 vehicles destroyed. 40 divisions vanished. The imbalance was overwhelming. German 1944 output: 39,807 aircraft, 1,854 tanks monthly at peak, 68,000 trucks yearly. American: 96,000 aircraft, 29,000 tanks, 650,000 trucks not counting British, Canadian, or Soviet production. U.S. wartime totals reached 297,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 2 million trucks, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. General Franz Halder summarized, "By 1944, Allied war production was 5-1, sometimes 10-1. We were not defeated. We were mathematically eliminated." Surviving German officers were transformed. They had witnessed not just military defeat, but ideological collapse. The soft Americans they had scorned fought with machines, fuel, and endless ammunition. Their courage met an enemy of logistics and production. Beyond quantity, technology decided the war. Proximity fuses, radar-guided naval guns, and amphibious DUKWS showed an engineering mastery Germany couldn't match. Hobart's funnies modified British tanks that cleared mines or bridged gaps, solved problems with ingenuity, not blood. By July, daylight movement was suicide. Allied aircraft 12,000 in theater versus 300 German flew 8,000 sorties daily. HMS Rodney and USS Nevada fired inland with devastating precision, their main batteries functioning as long-range artillery. By August 30, 1944, Allied records listed 2,052,299 personnel, 438,471 vehicles, and 3,982,259 tons of supplies landed. German losses in Normandy exceeded 240,000 killed and 200,000 captured. In 1954, surviving German officers met in Bonn-Blumentritt said, "War had changed. It was no longer armies but economies that fought. We counted divisions. They counted factories." On June 6, 1984, Walter Olmsen returned to Krisk Battery at 73. Standing where he once fired on the fleet, he told assembled veterans, "40 years ago, I saw the impossibly a sea of ships, from horizon to horizon. Weak nations don't build 7,000 ships. Divided nations don't coordinate such an invasion. I fired my guns and might as well have thrown stones at the tide." The lesson was clear then as now. Industrial capacity is military capacity. The sea of ships that filled the channel that morning was more than an invasion force. It was proof that industrial power, once awakened, could reshape the world. The German officers who saw that armada realized courage alone could not win modern wars. Their defeat was not of valor, but of arithmetic, not tactical, but industrial. It was written in steel across the English Channel. On the morning when 7,000 ships announced that American industry had come to Europe and nothing would ever be the same again.